Them is a viscerally scary and uncomfortable show. And the real horror of the show doesn't come from the supernatural monsters and spirits haunting the Emery family, but come from the real life experiences and the real situations that they had to undergo, escaping the South and moving away to what they seem to think would be a good life in Compton, California. And now today we may see Compton as a predominantly black city, but back in the 50s, before white flight took place, it was a bustling middle class for white Americans, and moving from the South to the West in search of opportunity, escaping past traumatic racist events. You would think that the family would find refuge, but being black in America is the real horror story here, because no matter where you go, you would receive this type of treatment. And we watched the breakdown and the psychological deterioration, the attacks on the Emery family, and we see just because of the color of their skin, the way that they're terrorized. Hey guys, I'm Shalon. Welcome to the Bin Zone, and on today's video we're going to be breaking down season 1 of Them, looking at the psychology of the Emery family, looking at all the things that they had to endure, the real horrors of this show, while also looking at the flip side, their white neighbors, and how society as a whole is creating this horrific story. While we will touch up on the spirits and the overall evilness of it all, the real horror and the real nastiness comes from their situations. So guys, without further ado, hit the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and let's dive into this deep breakdown of Them season 1. The show takes place in the 1950s, and during this time, black people were going through something called the Great Migration, where they were leaving the racist South, looking for better opportunities in other parts of the country, moving to Chicago, moving to the West, anything to get away from the racist South, with the hopes of finding a better future for themselves and their families. And that's when we find the Emerys moving to Compton, California. Henry Emery and his wife Lucky and their 2 daughters, Ruby and Gracie. And spoilers if you have not seen the show, we're diving into that because of the murder and brutal attack of their newborn son. They decided to move away. This scene alone is sickening, and the reason behind it is never explained. The woman just came and did what she did. There needs to be no explanation though. We don't need to know why it happened, because they need no reason. It doesn't have to have a deeper understanding besides the fact that these are what these people do, and that's it. That is terrifying. You don't have to do anything to anybody. You don't have to attack anybody just because. With this traumatic experience happening, Henry took his family and did the right thing and moved them across the country. But from the moment they arrive in Compton, a new nightmare begins. We see both the reactions from the Emery family when they're the only black people in this neighborhood, and the fact that they're the only black people in this neighborhood, we start to see the xenophobia, the racism, and the overall animosity. Before they even meet any neighbors, it's already there. They're surrounded by enemies who want them gone. And each of them now have to navigate their lives in this new unsettling world, in this new city where they don't really have family, they just have each other, and they're surrounded by people who don't want them for no reason other than the color of their skin, and their nightmares are truly just now beginning. We're starting off with Henry Emery, the patriarch of the family, the representation of the black male head of the household, and his story itself already starts tragic. A veteran of World War II, Henry suffers PTSD because we know the treatment of African Americans in the war. They needed their bodies, they needed the manpower to help them fight the war, but they were treated differently. Their barracks were different, the missions that they had were different, and the things that they saw and had to endure left a scar on Henry, where even the smell of sweets triggers this uncontrollable anxiety, and his PTSD flashbacks happen that negatively affect him and his relationship with his family, which is why when he lost his son, instead of facing that or facing his PTSD, because again, this is the 1950s, therapy and all that really isn't at the forefront, Henry packs his family up and moves. Whenever he gets triggered, it's time to move. And for him, he sees it as overcoming. He gets a new job. He becomes an engineer. He is probably one of the very few black engineers, just to show just how brilliant this man is. And even when he tries to look the other way, tries to be optimistic and ingratiate himself in the workplace, he faces a glass ceiling. Workplace racism at its finest. His supervisor is diminishing his value and essentially saying he's the token black guy, diversity hire, we did you a solid, but we don't really think you're smart enough to be an engineer, and I'm not going to let you meet the higher ups. And Henry has to deal with that. Dealing with that form of racism in the workplace is something that permeates today, as well as not just the effect that has on him. He has to present that strong black male figure for his family while being surrounded by all these attacks that were not of his own doing. The war was not his own doing. The glass ceiling that he faces at work and the overt racism that his boss gives him is not. His neighbors, the police officer, all of that compounds, and now he starts to develop hallucinations because the terror of the situation starts to play on his mind, and he starts to see the tap dance man. And in a sense, it could be his own self-projection being manifested outwardly, because he has to tap dance in this society. He realizes, I'm a nigga. In this world, I'm trying to make a place for my family, my daughters. I failed to protect my son, but it will not happen again. And I have to tap dance, and that is eating up inside, and that boils over, and we see just how deadly that gets. And none of it is his fault. Again, psychology and mental health is not a big aspect of the times. That is no more prevalent in his wife, Lucky Emery, who suffers the most throughout the show. And we're gonna talk about this a lot because this is oftentimes the portrayal of the black woman. She goes through the most. All of the situations that happen are compounded against her. Her first tragedy, she was the only one home and could not defend her son. They pinned her down, and I don't even want to speak on what they did. I'll show clips. The overall nastiness of what they did to her son once her husband left a scar. Her trauma was not resolved. While Henry may have gotten PTSD from the war, she got PTSD from her own living room, from watching what they did to her son, and she could not defend herself. There was no help and there was no provocation. So when we meet her, she's aloof and she's presenting it in a way which seems like she's disconnected from the other family members, and that shows you the outward appearance of it all. In the first few episodes of the season, we don't know what Lucky's going through, but she's presented almost as though they're framing her as a crazy black woman. And as the season progresses, we start to peel back the layers and understand where everything is coming from, why she mothers the way she does, why she spaces out, and we start to learn that she's resilient. We see why she's so confrontational with her white neighbors, and because they're Karens, and because of her previous experience with white women, it was a white woman that started the assault on her and her child. All that and her motherly instincts protect her family, and not being taken seriously by her husband and society as a whole is something black women struggle through a lot. And we see how her mental state devolves, and we see how she keeps getting visions of her child's being killed, which is something that a mother who was there, who was supposed to be nurturing her child, had to witness, and no one saw the brutality but her. And she has to put on a brave face. She has to be the strong black woman because that's what's expected of her. And during this time, during the 50s, women's roles were to stay at home. The kids went to school, the husband went to work, and she has to sit alone with her thoughts, with the past trauma, no one really understanding it. And on top of that, the vitriol of her neighbors, having to defend her household, her daughters on their way to the school bus stop, all of that weighs in on her. And during this time, I said earlier, mental health was not as prevalent as it is now, and especially for women. At the time when they were struggling with anxiety and the pressures of maintaining this facade of the family life, they were going through it. They were going through anxiety, and that was presented as hysteria. Even when women were going through legitimate problems, it was presented as hysteria. Now imagine if that's being done to women in general, white women. Now take that down to people who are often looked at as the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to society, black women. No one's taking her seriously. And that goes deeper when we start talking about women and the medical field, because we saw what happened towards the end. We saw them trying to lobotomize black women, dosifying them, taking them away from their family, and essentially the medical system failing them and not seeing that she's not a harm to her children. It is just a psychological break. And all these women, all these black women are suffering through this, and instead of helping them, especially the medical field, does more damage to black women than it actually does to help. To this day, this is still happening, and black women, black men as well, because we see Henry's PTSD. The medical field and black people just don't have a good relationship. And that trickles down from Lucky to her two daughters, Ruby and Gracie. And watching them see their mother, the person who's supposed to be their figure, both of them reject their mom in the beginning. They don't want to be like her. They're only seeing the side effects or the aftermath of all the trauma she's receiving. And it's not until Ruby starts going to an all-white school and starts going through the teenage struggles of identity issue, hating her black skin because it makes her an outsider in this world, while not seeing how her mother loves her, and she wanting not to be like her mother because all she sees is how society frames her mom, and she wants to be as far away from that, to the point where Ruby actually douses herself in white paint and also has a psychological break and tries to turn herself white. She doesn't think she's beautiful. Even though she's gorgeous, she doesn't see herself that way because she's not white. Because society has made it not cool, not beautiful to be black, and they painted her mom a certain way where she would even reject her own mother. She has to go to school and deal with that. Even when she's participating and answering the questions and showing her intelligence, the class is making fun of her, grunting monkey noises at her, destroying her self-esteem. Even before she even becomes a woman, society is destroying young black girls. And Gracie, at a young age, is losing her innocence, has her childhood fears as not becoming her mom, trying to become this fake teacher in a book, this white woman teacher, as opposed to her mother, who is a teacher. You see how the reflection of destroying Lucky's character, the trauma that she has to deal with, is trickling down to her daughters and destroying the relationship between a black mom and her black daughter. And that as well permeates. You see what I mean when I said this show is scary? It's not the horror. The situations and the monsters and the spirits attacking them, jump scares and all that is cool. But when you see the destruction of the family and you see their fears, their traumas manifest in a form, when Ruby put the white paint on her, I got chills, I got goosebumps. To want to destroy who you are, to fit into society, is the scariest shit I've ever seen. Especially from a young, black, beautiful girl. And Gracie watching this and watching her mother's violent outburst against people, not really understanding what it means, what's happening around her, not understanding why these people are doing what they're doing, waking up to seeing dolls all around. This is some horrific shit. And it all comes in the form of white terror. And a lot of the white characters on this show represent some form of white terror. Betty Wendell, the face of 1,000 Karens, is the face of overt racism and social policing. Her husband, Clark Wendell, is subtle racism and complicity. Even though he's also part of a minority group, he can hide himself because he's white. They can't, and he's complicit in that. You have the milkman as the symbol of insidious and everyday white terror, and the other neighbors represent a collective of white fear and aggression. Don't even get me started on Sergeant Whitley and the predatory loans that they're getting out to black people to further corrupt them. The whole thing is insidious. Right down to you, owning a home is the biggest aspect of wealth you can have, and even using that to destroy black wealth is disgusting. Burning their yard, leaving dolls around their families, surrounding them, playing music as early as the crack of dawn, knowing that Lucky's gonna be home alone all day and the white women are gonna sit there all day because, again, they have nothing better to do, and terrorize her with racist music is another form of psychological terror. Even though at this point she's seeing the man in the black hat, all that is happening, all that is scary, but at the same time, it's not scary as you're not at peace, you're not safe in your home. And it just keeps boiling and boiling over, even to the point where they're the ones being assaulted in their own home. Lucky is taken away. The family itself is terrorized. The Emerys, because of their skin color, whether at work or in the neighborhood, were never given a fair chance. They were terrorized, attacked, almost killed because of their skin color, because they started triggering white flight. The neighbors who could afford it started leaving the neighborhood, and the ones who couldn't were the ones who did not want black people coming because of what that would mean for them. And when we talk about Betty, the face of all this, the only one without a child, the fear of being erased was biggest on her. She doesn't have a child. She can't pass on her legacy. and therefore once black people in her mind start to take over the neighborhood, she's gonna be erased. She starts talking about her grandfather, how they built this place, when actuality the actual labor force usually is black people. It'd be in California, I wouldn't be surprised if it was some Mexicans involved, but for the most part black people are the ones who physically built this country. And for her to take that and flip it and try to say, let's make America great again, really? But to touch on some of the horror parts, let's talk about the man in the black hat. If we strip it back and we go back and we watch the flashback, all it shows is that racism has been at the core of America, and the fact that he represents the overarching racism of the country, that the fact that it follows you generation through generation, he is the physical manifestation of it all. That's why I wasn't too scared about the horror part, because he's a ghost, but it's what he represents. It's what he does. The terrorization of this family through generations, while he's specifically targeting the Emery family, that could be a broader representation of America, targeting black people, terrorizing them since the inception. And all black people have been trying to do is find a home and a place to belong, to raise their family, a right everyone on this planet should have, especially in a country that you were brought against your will. He represents that. Then you have the tap dance man, who is the inner representation of who Henry thinks he is. The fact that he has to tap dance in front of society is something that bothers him to no end. But it isn't until the end where Lucky has to be a strong black woman, escapes the mental health facility, kills that doctor who deserves it, frees the other black women to do what they need to do, get back to her family. The daughters, Ruby and Gracie, save Henry, and together it's Lucky facing her fears, facing the black hat man, facing the woman, saving her daughter from cutting her face up, saving Gracie from Miss Vera, Gracie realizing that her mom is her idol, and it takes a black woman being strong. And while that is a great message, I also want to point out the fact that is another part that's scary, because while black women are being torn apart from all angles, the fact that they're putting the label of strong on her and she has to be the one, when does she get to kick her feet up? We put so much on black women to be strong. When do they get a chance to rest? Look what she went through. While Henry had his things, he had his PTSD, so did she. She arguably went through the most, but ultimately she had to overcome her problems to save the family. And that's why the black woman is very important. And the show itself, the true horror is the fact that we almost lost her to the healthcare system. We almost lost a strong black woman who had nothing wrong with her. She was terrorized by white people, and that brought her down to this place. She couldn't even let her son go. She couldn't process any of this because she had to be in constant fight mode. And the real horror of the show is that no matter where you go in this country, if you're black, you're gonna fight. And that is scary. There is no peace. You have to suck it up, be strong, and just survive. Jesus. But guys, that's just my thoughts on Them season 1. I'm gonna start season 2 relatively soon. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it in the comment section below. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and until next time, binge on.